So we will have with us, who will speak at the beginning, is Leyla Dakhli, who is a full-time historian in the French Center for National Research, presently settled in the Mark Bloch Center in Berlin. Her work deals with the study of Arab intellectuals and social history of the South Mediterranean region, with a particular focus on the history of women and the question of exiled intellectuals and activists. She is the principal investigator of the ERC founded program, DREAM, Drafting and Enacting the Revolution in the Arab Mediterranean. So I now give the floor for Leyla to start. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Dina. And yeah, well, a lot of people around. That's a real salon, like an extended salon. I'm very happy to be here and to be sharing some of my thoughts about the question of urban poors and the revolutions. Well, I think I'll be really brief, but sometimes when people start saying they will be brief, they won't, but I think I will, because I actually took seriously this idea of just opening the floor to discussions. So just a quick, some quick notes about some thoughts about what like this question evocates for me, and the connection between poverty and revolution mainly. So Arab revolutions have often been seen as revolts of freedom and democracy without anchoring in the social question. Even if it soon became apparent that the grounds of contestation often coincided with the popular districts, the analysis in social terms remained for a long time rather poor and marginal. And how can we explain this? I think that first of all, it has to be said that it's perhaps because we didn't do enough work as researchers. We probably didn't look enough at the working classes to do the social science work we need and to build on this and to be able to actually understand what was happening in 2010, 2011, 10 years ago. But of course, saying that is not just saying that it's entirely our fault as researchers, and it's not entirely the fault of the researchers. It's also related actually to the regimes that are and were in place. For it is not a question of approaching poverty solely in a statistical term, but to turn the working class into actual political actors with the work of social sciences and also with the work of giving voice to these poor people, or to the urban poor in this specific case. Statistics are available, even if they are often unreliable or not really reliable, but it's not exactly what we lacked or what we lack actually now. We don't lack surveys and numbers. We are lacking more qualitative actually studies on focusing on lifestyle, aspirations, and ways of living, to look at what was happening actually in these neighborhoods and what was happening specifically in those neighborhoods where we saw the uprising begin. So we must therefore produce knowledge and also bring out local knowledge that can give an account of the reality of the societies in the region. This is not always possible, of course, when the political and scientific freedoms are not guaranteed, as you all know. For if we look at the outbreak of the Tunisian revolution 10 years ago exactly, it's indeed towards the urban poor that it points. Mohamed Bouazizi is a young man who is not only unemployed, as he was categorized in the statistics. He may be statistically unemployed, but he's a hard worker, as many others, who earn his living at the limits of legality. As you know, he was selling fruits and vegetables in the streets. The revolt cannot be explained by these macro factors of unemployment or employment, but it takes ground into these multiple situations of what we can just call globally poverty. Mohamed Bouazizi was not actually unemployed, he was poor, a modest worker. He earned his living within the limits of legality, and he was at the mercy of changes of favor. This is also the case, for example, of the Rifan Shaheed Mohsen Fikri, as you may remember, who was selling fish on markets and was assassinated by the police, the Moroccan police, in October 2016 in a rubbish crusher. And there are many examples of these situations of hard work and precarity. So poverty is not only about poverty, it's about hard work, precarity, and a specific relationship to the state and to the power. Authoritarian regimes are based on force, but also on a system that tolerates petty trafficking or even lines off it directly through corruption. The regimes in place in Tunisia, for example, but also in the region, rely, even when they are not authoritarian or labelized as authoritarian, on this kind of clientelism, customer regimes. The poor, especially the urban poor, are directly dependent on this margin of tolerance of the regime. They are directly at the mercy of the whim of a power agent who will rake them in, threaten, or tolerate them. It is, I think, on this scale that the question of dignity, karama, of each and every person is at stake more than the level of poverty directly. So this is not a new story. This is where I'm trying to bring my field of expertise as historian. And I think from this observation of the present, one should go back and try to read what was happening in the recent past, at least. I don't know if you've all had the time to go through the text I've been passing around. So it concerns the bread riots in Tunisia in 1983, 1984. And the whole point is that I think that the bread riots are a moment that we will have to re-examine in order to understand our present and the 10 years that have just passed. Of course, if we actually want to dig into this question of the social explanation or the social, social factors of the revolts. These are the central point of the paper, but also the central point of what I want to say tonight is that it's a question of pacts between societies and the state, let's say, or the power or the elites. And these pacts have collapsed since the independence of the post-colonial states, and these pacts between the post-colonial states and their society have been collapsing in many ways. And there are steps in these collapse. One of the most important of this rupture was the one that put an end to the protective state, often with socialist connotations in many of the countries of the region. I'm not only talking about Tunisia. I think most of you who have other fields of expertise can recognize the experiments that were dealt with in Algeria, in Egypt, in Iraq, whatever. This post-colonial understand was bringing a promise of some kind of new social contract between the state and the societies. So this structure corresponds to the entry into economic liberalism, often called in the different country infitah, so opening of the economy, but mainly the economy, not the political sphere. And this infitah was done to meet the criteria of the IMF and the World Bank in different times. This also corresponds to the constitution of a liberal, also economically liberal bourgeoisie that allies itself with the regime to make a fortune. From the 1980s, a little bit before, a little bit after onwards, everywhere, the income gaps became wider and the market penetrated in the different countries. This necessitated the negotiation of a new social contract which largely passes through clientelism, al-wasta. They call it differently in different places. Paradoxically, or at least apparently, this new economic regime reinforces traditional solidarities, whether it be family, regional, religious, or corporate, like the army, for example, solidarity. All this affects the middle classes who are threatened and, of course, above all, are no longer at the center of government politics or policies. But it affects even more directly the poorest, especially in the cities where many families continue to flow. These families can no longer count on state services, which are increasingly weak, and therefore rely on the clientele of local elites or on corruption at all levels. Of course, we are talking about small levels of corruption. They are at the mercy of reversals of favor of the political customs of the people. In the neighborhoods, the links between the state and the inhabitants are partly based on illegal trafficking and on tolerance of these illegal traffickings. They are also based on violence and humiliation, which is well told in the songs of the soccer fans, for example, football fans, if you listen to them in the stadiums everywhere. There is no single cause, of course, for revolutions, but it seems to me that this approach to social issues must be pursued to enrich our understanding of what is to be a people. Because we have been talking a lot about people, and of course, this is what comes when you talk about revolution. If it has become revolutionary, these people, it is not through the magic of a few slogans, but through an experience of negotiation and resistance with the power. And this is, I think, what we should be digging into during this conversation altogether. Thank you.